the mainstream news media. While Americans rely on it daily for the latest reports on world and domestic events, a recent study conducted by the Cronkite School of Journalism indicates that nearly 67% of Americans don't trust major media for accurate reporting. Ask Americans specifically why they distrust the media, and the answers are generally vague. After all, reports of news media abuses aren't normally found on the front page or the nightly news. Nonetheless, they do exist. Dateline NBC, a primetime news program, airs a story in 1992 entitled Waiting to Explode. The story includes footage demonstrating that a line of trucks produced by General Motors readily explode on impact.
To see for ourselves what might happen in a side impact crash, Dateline NBC hired the Institute for Safety Analysis to conduct crash demonstrations. Unlike GM tests, the fuel tanks were filled with real gasoline. Look what happened. At impact, a small hole was punctured in the tank. According to our experts, the pressure of the collision and the crushing of the gas tank forced gasoline to spew from the gas cap. The fuel then erupted into flames when ignited by the impacting car's headlight.
After the program airs, one of the firemen at the taping of the crash contacts GM. The conversation inspires a full-scale investigation. 3 months later, NBC is forced to reveal their role in fabricating the news.
NBC's contractor did put incendiary devices under the trucks to ensure that there would be a fire if gasoline were released from the truck's gas tank.
We said the crash, quote, forced gasoline to spew from the fuel cap, end quote. GM says since the gas cap was the wrong cap for the GM filler tube, and because the gas tank was overfilled, the cap came off when the impact occurred.
We agree with GM that we should have told our viewers about these devices.
The Dateline reporter, however, said, quote, at impact, a small hole was punctured in the tank, unquote. GM has now x-rayed that tank and found no hole.
We acknowledge the placing of the incendiary devices under the truck was a bad idea from start to finish.
That's our new policy, and we'll be right back.
After the 1995 bombing of the Murrah Federal Building, information came to light that contradicted government claims disseminated through the mainstream media. One source was Carol Howe, a government informant. She revealed that federal agencies had prior knowledge of the terrorist plot and were ignoring several figures linked to the bombing. Roger Charles is a retired Marine colonel and former correspondent at ABC News. His news team interviewed Howe and obtained confirmation of her testimony.
So here we had confirmation from a government representative in Denver with the McVeigh Prosecution Task Force saying, your facts are accurate. So we think we've got a slam dunk story. It will be a piece of cake to get it on air now because we have confirmation from a government spokeswoman that our facts are true.
The story was ready to air on ABC Evening News, but to Charles' surprise, the story never ran.
A few minutes later, a phone rang. Tom Gerald from ABC 2020 was on the phone to Thrasher saying the story had been killed for the evening. Didn't know why, but the decision in New York was not to run the story on Peter Jennings' nightly news that night.
In order for the story to air, Charles reworked it following suggestions from New York.
Well, the next morning, Don Thrasher gets a call from New York, and he gives me one of these. I couldn't believe it. I knew what the signal was. The story was not going to go again.
In 1990, an age-old conflict in the Balkans erupted into civil war. A multi-sided and complicated overseas struggle was packaged by the mainstream media as a tidy melodrama. The predominantly Christian Serbs were cast as the villains. A key maneuver employed to demonize them involved a photo shoot.
The news has always been used to stampede our reason with a perception and emotion. When you're talking about war, you get those heart-tugging appeals to pity in particular, and we've seen that again using images.
Benjamin Works, president of the Strategic Issues Research Institute, is a military affairs analyst for Fox News and CNN. He recalls the emergency shelters set up by the Serbs to accommodate Bosnian refugees.
I remember very vividly seeing tours by the camp commander showing the mess hall, showing food that, I wouldn't pay money for, but I'd gladly eat if it were free. And yet this was turned into a sensational story about concentration camps. And the propaganda twist on that came out of both the electronic media and the newspapers, and very glaring covers on Time magazine and such.
Judgment, an independent expose, reveals how a British film crew photographed a Bosnian emergency shelter to look like a Nazi concentration camp. The film crew positioned themselves inside a barbed wire enclosure to shoot out at refugees, who were free to come and go as they pleased. The cameras zeroed in on a refugee whose emaciated appearance was the result of a birth defect.
We found that all of these allegations of a concentration camp were really frauds perpetrated by the reporters, and in fact, at least one, Roy Gutman, won a Pulitzer Prize for this kind of fabrication.
And the image that helped motivate American involvement in an overseas entanglement was a total fake.
Joe Lockhart, Peter Mayer of CBS News, Steve Holland of Reuters, the incoming Vice President, Jay Leno, host of NBC's Tonight Show, Lori Santos of United Press International, Karin Jorgensen, editor of USA Today, Helen Thomas of UPI, Dean of the White House Press Corps.
The star system has definitely crept into the media to the point where, although there used to be journalistic standards and something of a Chinese wall between the media pros and the newsmakers, that's been blurred, particularly by the administration, which has deliberately cultivated media personalities who are now present as guests at White House state dinners. And they don't seem to see any compromise of ethics or any conflict of interest in that.
The executives, the editors in print media, the senior producers, executive producers in the visual media, these are the people that have the ideological bias. And what's probably almost as important, the personal friendships. They go to the same country clubs, they go to the same dinners, they socialize with a lot of the people that they cover.
And yet this is where corruption sets into any system. When the censors and the monitors become friendly with the people they monitor, that's when standards fly out the window.
Today, standards in mainstream news reporting have more to do with career enhancement than reporting the truth.
Of course, to get ahead in a bureaucracy by giving the boss what he wants, that's how you get ahead. So again, that is indicative of why there's so much homogenization in the media.
You know, if you wanted to look at a pyramid, and the first couple layers, the really eager, hard-working young journalists are out there trying to get the stories, trying to make a name so they can move up that pyramid. Well,